Now, you know those people who speak like this?
Porque los latinos, o sea, we make a lot of noise. Yeah, it's exciting porque soy muy mexicana.
Huh?
Me siento tan emocionada and de verdad me siento un poquito, I have receiving me like, como soy familia.
Is it Spanish? Is it English? Well, not really. Meet Spanglish. Now, you might think that Spanglish is a brand spanking new linguistic phenomenon, but you would be wrong. The origins of Spanglish go all the way back to a certain war, and I've got the whole story right here. So what is Spanglish? Well, Spanglish or Spanglish is a mixed language that Spanish and English-speaking people use to communicate. Basically, you speak both English and Spanish in one conversation, like multitasking, but with words. In Latino culture, Spanglish is huge and millions of people speak it every day, mostly in the US.
Esta cosa no sabe cómo printear para nada.
Tengo que pagar todos estos biles y ahora no puedo ir de shopping.
A lot of people don't really understand Spanglish. They'll say, yeah, they're just gonna mixing words and grammar from both languages. And some people have very strong feelings about Spanglish. It's a bit of a Marmite situation. You either love it or hate it. And I know you've probably never even heard of Marmite, but let's just say Spanglish stirs up a lot of feelings. But what if I told you that this mixed language is very linguistically sound, and I can prove it?
Arrancamos con un review. Hay serios problemas de branding y el top management tiene serios concerns.
Estamos perdiendo awareness. Ya no estamos en el top of mind del target.
So let's look at how Spanglish works. On my counts, there are 5 main ways to do Spanglish. So at the end, you can tell me which way is your favorite. And here is a hint. We are going to vacunar la carpeta. Vaccinate the folder. Wait, what? Time for a quick story.
No say aquí, please. Hello. Chica, ni siquiera sabe lo que está haciendo. I'm gonna tell you something right now. Mira, cuando yo presiono este botón, I'm gonna go so fast that you're gonna be like, wow, where did she go?
In the 1940s, a Puerto Rican poet and journalist named Salvador Tío came up with the name Spanglish. But did you know that Spanglish, the English pronunciation, has roots in the 1800s? That's right, Spanglish origins go all the way back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which ended the Mexican-American War. In the treaty, a huge part of Mexican land was sold to the US, and residents who lived there had 2 years to decide whether to choose US or Mexican citizenship. There was one problem. Most of the Mexicans lived out in rural areas, and by the time they got the news about this land sale, a few years had already passed. And to be fair, it was the 1800s. And we have a video of this little slice of history over on the StoryLearning Spanish channel if you're interested. But anyway, these people became automatic US citizens, and people who spoke Spanish at home were often forced to use English for work, for legal issues, and I'm sure for chatting with their new neighbors. And before long, tons of Mexican words like tequila and coyote became part of English vocabulary. The same thing happened to Spanish. So, for example, the English word sheriff went from el alguacil to el sheriff, sheriff, you see? And all the money words also got new names. So there's this major moment when the two languages started to come together. Later, there were other wars, like the Spanish-American War of 1898. More contact, more language mixing. And in Puerto Rico, between 1902 and 1948, school kids were given most of their lessons in English. And for those of you outside the US, if you didn't know, Puerto Rico actually belongs to the US, and today they have the most vibrant Spanglish culture of all. So it all started with people needing to understand each other. And if you would like to understand lots more cool things about languages, well, like and subscribe to this channel so I can keep bringing you the stories. And remember to click that notification bell as well, or the news won't reach you till 2025. The research says that 53% of second-generation Latinos in the US speak Spanglish some of the time, and 26% speak Spanglish most of the time. And there's no one way to do it, because, you see, it's a living language, always changing and growing.
My mama doesn't say yes, she says, aha! And suddenly, the sky in her mouth becomes a hectolavoso. Her tongue can't lay itself down flat enough for the English language.
New York, Florida, Texas, California, they all have their own versions. Tex-Mex, Dominicanish, Chicano. Cubans in Miami speak Cubonic, and Puerto Ricans in New York City speak New Yorican. Even Panama has its own variety since the US controlled the Panama Canal for 96 years. But there's no such thing as one Spanglish language.
Crudo is raw.
Use it in a sentence.
Oh no, girl, why did I just... In my head, I just went somewhere that you didn't know. It means hangover? Yeah. Oh, I don't know anything about that.
Automatic understanding, not guaranteed. But however someone speaks Spanglish, it happens naturally. Kids grow up speaking it when they hear Spanglish at home and English with their friends. I think when kids aren't around, mum and dad are probably secretly speaking Spanglish too, just like an older, kind of less cool version. Meanwhile, new immigrants speak differently from these second generation kids and their parents. So I guess it doesn't matter how you mix the two languages, right? Now, we're going to see if this sentence is wrong or right. Let's start with this. Spanglish is not a native tongue or creole, so there's no right way to do it, but there might be a wrong way to do it. How does that possibly make sense? And do all these varieties have anything at all in common? Well, yes, they do, because here's the thing. For many people, Spanglish is a second language, and with any language comes a few rules, even if they are unwritten ones. Otherwise, things could go south very, very fast.
Andy, estás muy callado. ¿Qué opinas? Cool.
You're forgetting all your Spanish. You never practice.
Perdóname, mami, soy embarazada.
You just told me that you're pregnant.
Congratulations, you're glowing.
False friends, you probably heard this term before, they trick you because they act like they are the right word when they're actually not. Vacunar la carpeta really means in Spanglish exactly what it looks like. Vacuum the carpet. That's right, it is correct in Spanglish. In Spanish though, vacunar is not to vacuum and carpeta is not carpet. There are tons of these. You can say introducir to introduce someone, although in Spanish it means something totally different. Now remember, this isn't wrong, it's just not Spanish. The most common type of Spanglish has something to do with something called calques, and the false friends we just saw actually fit into this category. Calques are literal translations from one language to another. So you can translate something like, I'll call you back, word for word in Spanglish, te llamo atrás. Makes no sense in Spanish, in the original language, because in Spanish you would say, te llamo después, te llamo luego. But in Spanglish, te llamo para atrás, no problem, it works because you're translating literally from the English and that is mutually understood. Now, there is this funny thing called from Lostiano. From what? Well, from lost to the river, that famous English saying. Except, wait, it's not an English saying at all. It is a word-for-word translation of the Spanish idiom de perdidos a río, which means once you've committed to something hard, well, you may as well carry on till the end. It's funny because this direct translation makes no sense whatsoever in English. Spanglish is full of weird humor like this, and they call it from Lostiano. Laugh, just roll your eyes. It's okay. By the way, if you're enjoying this story, well, this whole channel is full of stories about language learning, but the stories don't stop there because here at StoryLearning, I actually teach languages through story too. The reason is that stories are the best way that I found to learn any language, because stories are how we learn naturally. It's how we learned our first languages, and we can use stories to learn a new language too, which is exactly how I teach here. And if you'd like to learn more about this, well, I've put together a completely free story learning kit that shows you how to learn languages using the amazing power of stories. So if you are curious, check out the link below in the description, claim your free story learning kit and check it out.
Ay, mira que compré en el mall para el party.
Rufo, troca, lonche, mol, pare. These are all new Spanglish words that used to be English words. And in Spanglish, your breakfast cereals, well, they all get one collective name, cornflake. See, there is a huge list of these and it keeps growing, but it's all part of one big feature of Spanglish.
I went to the store to buy some bananas, but they were all sold out. Fui a la tienda a comprar unas bananas, pero ya no quedaban. Fui al store a comprar some bananas, pero ya estaban sold out.
One sentence, two languages, and perfect sense. Code switching is spontaneous. It just happens while you're speaking. Sometimes it happens because you don't know the word you need in one language. Other times it's because the other language has a better word for what you're trying to say, so you just randomly use that word in the middle of a sentence. This is very, very common in language usage around the world. It happens naturally when people grow up bilingual or in communities and diasporas around the world. In Cantonese, another language which I know quite well, it's really weird because you find yourself using English words and phrases literally half the time. But here's the thing about code switching. To be able to do that, to code switch in the same sentence, you have to know both languages very, very well. And once again, you can't just randomly mix together languages. Code switching generally happens when a word or phrase doesn't exist in one of the languages, or simply that there's a more natural or familiar way of saying it in the other language. And you have to know that because that's the moment that you code switch. Sounds hard, I know, but never fear, all will be well because there is a rule, and all will become clear in just a minute. Googlear, brunchear, these are all Spanglish verbs. And if you want to talk about hanging out with your friends, for example, hanging out, there's a verb for that, which is, of course, hanguear.
Estoy aburridísimo, bro.
Ya llegó el weekend, no tengo nada que hacer.
Bueno, pero let's fix it. Vamos a janguear. I'll pick you up a las 8.
It looks odd, but I will show you how it works. You could even have some fun inventing your own ones, like Sofía está whatsappeando con su amiga. Now, whatsappeando is an English word, international word, whatever, to WhatsApp somebody. It's turned into a Spanish verb here, though, whatsappeando. See, you take WhatsApp plus eando equals whatsappeando, which is kind of Spanglish, right? Well, it is. And anything else you notice about the grammar? Well, see, the Spanish part of the word has correct Spanish grammar because eando is the correct form of the continuous in Spanish. And this reveals the rule that I was talking about earlier about using Spanglish properly. In Spanglish, the Spanish parts need to have correct Spanish grammar, and the English parts need to have grammatically correct English too. You can mix and match, but whatever is borrowed from the other language needs to be grammatically correct in that language. And this is a clue to answering our very first question from the beginning of the video. Is Spanglish, what is it? Is it lazy Spanish? Is it a creole? Is it a linguistic phenomenon? Well, here we can cross off creole, because in order for it to be a creole, we would expect to see some adaptation of the two languages when they meet each other. That's not really happening with Spanglish. There is a kind of linguistic firewall between the Spanish parts and the English parts.
My mother instilled a sense of discipline, switching back and forth between English and Spanish. Whenever me and my 3 brothers got out of hand, se los estoy advirtiendo for the last time. No me hagan pasar un mal rato, because por mi madre, se los juro, if I have to pull this car over, everybody se va a llevar un cocotazo.
Spanglish is everywhere. It's in movies, comedy, music, books. Anybody here read Don Quixote in Spanglish? It does exist.
Las brujas boogie, muertos bop. Los esqueletos do the hop.
This one is a beautiful children's book that an author called Judy Morales wrote to help immigrant kids feel safe using mixed languages to understand their new world. And we cannot forget the classics. But I bet I can show you Spanglish that you didn't even realize was part of your everyday life.
I'm hearing a lot of Spanglish advertising now. La nueva variety bucket de Kentucky Fried Chicken. Cada pedacito de pollo frito está finger-licking delicioso.
That's right, businesses, well, they know that Spanglish works, and if you live in the US, I'm sure you've noticed this.
The way I see it is that Spanish and English are like siblings. They are like these two languages that are not separate from each other. In fact, they are part of one same language. There are many different ways of saying that story, and every one of us, you have your very own way to tell what you want to say.
Yeah, so this is the burning question. Is Spanglish really its own language? Well, I know many people see Spanglish as a sign of laziness or poor language skills, and you might have grandparents who are quite suspicious of this strange alien invasion that's destroying the Spanish language.
Oh yes, Spanglish is my favorite. You will say a few words in Spanish and you'll throw in a few words in English.
Okay. She gets it. So here is some food for thought. Scholars have been actually studying this for a long time and found that there is sophisticated brain work going on behind code switching. That is right, it is not random at all. It is patterned. Surprised? Well, you see, most times when people go back and forth between English and Spanish, they follow logical grammar rules without even realizing it. In fact, they follow both languages' rules, like we saw earlier. To be able to do that, they have to know both languages very well, right? So it cannot be lazy. It is quite the juggling act. Code switching is a phenomenon no matter what languages that you do it in. But is Spanglish its own language? The consensus is not really. But languages are always changing. This is how they evolve. So let's just say Spanglish, well, it ain't going anywhere. And for many people, it is part of their identity. One thing I know for sure, Spanish, the original Spanish here, is in absolutely no danger of being destroyed. And if you want to know where Spanish came from, well, it's not what you think. And you can find the full video right over here in this story.